After the recent bizarre events that have happened on Skinwalker Ranch, we really wanted to speak with a credible investigator with past experience here. John is a retired U.S. Army colonel, and he was also a member of Robert Bigelow's team known as the National Institute for Discovery Science. They investigated the ranch for over 2 decades, and this is the first time someone from that group has been willing to engage with us.
After acquiring the ranch in the 1990s, Robert Bigelow immediately launched what was an unprecedented scientific investigation of the property. They ended up encountering all sorts of strangeness, everything from cattle mutilations to UFO phenomena to what can only be described as poltergeist-like activity.
The observers are on the ridgeline to the north and looking down on Homestead too. And they see a spot of light that expands, and something came out about 6 foot tall. So something big came out, ran off, and yet you don't find any physical evidence of it.
Well, we've had 2 events within the last 3 weeks where something appeared to be stalking us or watching us, and when we tried to find it, it vanished and there was not a single track anywhere, and the roads are just as dusty now as they were then, so it should have left tracks.
Right. One of the things that you did mention, though, about being stalked, one of our guys, he talks about having another experience out of the old Homestead area. I put, again, the very high strangeness, high credibility. This is in the night, and there seemed to be something moving across the trees. You get a distortion, but it's not clear that something might be there.
That's interesting. We saw something that we described after the fact as looking like a predator. It was there 1 second and then it was just gone.
Yes, we had those kind of experiences. Some of our people, they're out late at night. This is in the winter, and they look up and there's something up in the trees, and it looks like it's above one of the cattle. One of our guys had a rifle with him and shot. Whatever it was fell out of the tree and disappeared totally. They went out the next day and they said it was winter and there was some snow on the ground. And the one thing we found was this track that looked like a gigantic raptor. I mean, 3-prong, we're talking out of Jurassic Park kind of raptor print, and could not find any other tracks whatsoever.
Of all these strange phenomena that happened when you were here, and even speculate some, what do you think it is?
I'm not even sure how to begin addressing the complexity of that. Now, it's my view that these things are all connected in some way. I would say the area is a portal. It's like multi-dimensional reality. And I think periodically the dimensions overlap. And when they do, those sorts of things that you see are just as physical as you sitting there right now. But when it separates, it's gone.
I find it both interesting and a bit jarring to hear Colonel Alexander state in such matter-of-fact terms that the ranch is in fact a place where portals to unknown dimensions actually open and close.
If we're actually dealing with a portal, one explanation could be that it's a wormhole, which is theorized to be a literal gateway between 2 different dimensions in both time and space. Now, it might sound like something out of science fiction, but not only did Albert Einstein believe they could actually exist, I've had my own experiences here that made me wonder if it's possible too.
Your statement was that, in short, I agree with Eric. We worked together when he was with NIDS. I think I referred him to Bob Bigelow to get hired. As we discussed, the objects are not made by humans. That said, the ET hypothesis is too simple. Trying to raise the complexity issues with the general public is well beyond their comprehension. So simply stating not man-made should meet the needs of most people. Now, my audience is far more educated than the general public on these issues. And so I would really appreciate it if you were able to just unpack this statement in more detail. Are we dealing with an ultra-terrestrial, extra-dimensional component? What is it that you believe to be beyond the comprehension of the general public?
Well, whatever this is, it is terribly complex and probably beyond our possibility to imagine. And we're not at the point of getting simple answers, but we're not even asking the right questions yet. That's usually followed by what are the right questions, and I really don't know. But what we're dealing with is terribly, terribly complex. The reason I come down against the extraterrestrial hypothesis, which is very popular and a logical starting point if you haven't become embroiled in this topic.
Right.
But let me just say, there have been reports of interactions between humans and sentient non-human beings throughout the entirety of human history, and it involves in all cultures. That they fly in on little tin cans is a fairly new wrinkle in that. They fairly just a few decades when we're looking at millennia of reports. Also, if you look at the reports of what these beings are like, it is so diverse that you would have to say Earth is on the bucket list, the galactic bucket list of places you must visit if all of these different kinds of beings are stopping by. And even worse, that they have subdivided Earth. Certain types go to certain areas and belong to them. I am convinced, let me be clear, I think the events do occur. So I'm not suggesting that these are illusions or hallucinations or anything else. At least some of them are actually physical interactions. But how that emerges, what you discussed about interdimensional or intertemporal or whatnot, I think it's beyond our ability to comprehend at this point. I came up with a phrase called the precognitive sentient phenomena. And the point there was that we were studying certain things, but there was I hate to call it, I don't know how to describe it, a supernumerary that was definitely in charge. And it seemed to know how we would respond to phenomena before the observation took place. It was certainly sentient, it was certainly smarter than us, and phenomenological. And all was one step ahead. Every time we get close and start to study, you say, oh, you like that? Try this. Now you're seeing similar sorts of things in the UFO phenomena as well, as it morphs enough to stay ahead of whatever sensors or data collection systems that we have. And it changes over time. Sometimes to meet our expectations, other times it totally changes our perception of what we're trying to observe.
You said before that you don't consider these phenomenon as a threat due to the fact that their technological capabilities are so far ahead of our own that they could have defeated humanity anytime they wanted and could still do so today. And I agree with this point of view. But one thing I would put to you is the idea that this could be a long game manipulation. There are those that believe the establishment of world religions was precipitated by these phenomenon, and that this in of itself led to bifurcation and conflict amongst humanity. And some proponents of the UFO conversation, such as Tom DeLonge, say that there are essentially good gods and bad gods. What are your thoughts on the possibility of there being multiple conflicting agendas from different beings or intelligences that have impacted our world in a way that's caused conflict?
Reptilians versus the Nordics?
Well, it's
gray guys? Or?
Is it simply that they could destroy us, but they haven't, therefore they're not a threat? Or could it be more of a multi-dimensional chess game, essentially?
I think that's taking it too far. Remember, if you're familiar, I'm sure, with the Condon report.
Yeah.
And you have the Condon report that followed that in the UK. And what people mistake there is the question to Condon was not, are UFOs real? It was that when you're posing, were they a threat? And, we have not been ostensibly invaded. The
reason I brought it up is because specifically Tom DeLonge was someone that had said that he was apparently told this, that there are quote unquote good gods and bad gods, and that there's this whole kind of, warring faction. And it's not something that I particularly subscribe to, but I just thought that it was worth bringing up because it was something that he claimed to have been quite literally told by insiders.
Hardly new. I mean, you do hear it in the UFO genre as well, but you do find that in religion. he and some guys are down fishing. The whole story takes hours, but they're, the generic parts. He comes up and he sees this thing floating. He disappears. He comes back. They had built a fire. The fire is dying out. They say, "Where have you been?" He thinks it's 20 minutes. It's been hours. Little creepy crawlers come around and chase him. UFOs flying over, shooting things down. He goes back to the house. ET shows up at his window. He goes running off. The ET, this being chases him. He thinks he's being, captured. And the entity says telepathically, "You don't understand. We're here to help." And then disappears. The next morning, he's around noon. He goes, "Gee, I haven't taken my medicine." Turns out he had Crohn's disease, and so he had a spontaneous healing. By the way, he has not taken his medicine in all of the intervening years. Why would I believe any of that? Years later, I'm there visiting him, and we're out at the spot where the incident occurred, and he goes, "Oh, I think they're here." And within a few seconds, this thing popped into view above us and went shooting off. And it was a temporal relationship between him saying, "I think they're here." Now, when you look at this case, if you thought of it from a purely logical standpoint, none of it makes sense. I mean, you've got craft that are showing up, the spontaneous healing, time, abductions, etc. And yet, the physical things seem to have happened.
I want to quickly touch on Skinwalker Ranch and the concept that you put forward in your book, John, regarding what you call, which you've mentioned just a moment ago, precognitive sentient phenomena at Skinwalker, which you studied when you worked for Robert Bigelow. An example of this type of phenomena is the very real issue of cattle mutilation. You address one case of this type of mutilation, which took place in broad daylight and within 300 meters of and in the direct line of sight of a rancher. You were quoted to say the following: "As inconceivable as it seems, the best explanation was that the mutilation actually took place at another location and the body returned. Only two alternatives allow for that scenario: an invisible UFO or interdimensional interaction, and both exceed our understanding. This is a case in which PSP proved to be completely in charge and absolutely malicious." Now, did you assess that there was a high level of threat to humans at Skinwalker Ranch, given the PSP's capabilities for harm? And did you or anyone else you were working with at the time experience what's been classified as hitchhikers?
That actually came along later. Did we feel threats at the time? No, did not. Well, having said that, since Brandon took the ranch, they have reported, in fact, the ranch foreman has reported having a serious head injury, getting hospitalized on more than one occasion. One of the things that Bob himself, Bigelow, has mentioned now in a very recent interview with George Knapp, and he had told me that his wife asked him to sell the ranch, and that he describes an incident where, after being up there, that he's back at the house, he's sound asleep, and Diane said she woke up and here's this faceless entity just hovering right above her.
Wow.
Very, very scary. And like I say, this is the first time that I've heard him talk about this publicly. There are others who have said, yeah, things followed them home. But this is not uncommon in a range of phenomena where people have been dealing with poltergeists. In fact, I'll give you an example. Again, in Reality Denied, I tell the story of a traveling poltergeist. Was married to a woman who had 3 kids. And there was a poltergeist that followed us. It started initially in Hawaii, happened again. It seems to be following teenage girls. This is not uncommon with poltergeist phenomena to the Carmel area. We're at Fort Ord for a short time, and then on to Atlanta. We had a number of incidents.
So as the discussion started with Colonel John Alexander talking about the possibilities here of a unified field theory accounting for all the ins and outs of a paranormal experience. It's not just a ghost. It's not just a UFO. Chris asked a question of Colonel Alexander. Would you continue your response, please?
Well, I think one of the things that he asked about or mentioned is really quite important and almost ubiquitous, and that is the trickster component. And one of the problems you have is none of these things ever always fit. No matter what you do when you're studying phenomena, usually you start down a path, and all of a sudden you see a significant shift. If you take UFOs, look at how many times, the whole context has changed from old airships to whether having more abductions, the kinds of things that are seen, etc. But the trickster tends to show up. I might mention what's colloquially known as Skinwalker Ranch. As you know, I worked for Bob and had spent time up there. And there were very, very strange things that happened, no doubt about it. And we had, the ranch instrumented, and it was kind of amazing how many things would happen, like, just off camera. And I've always said that there seems to be some kind of higher consciousness at play that certainly has a sense of humor. And you start studying something, and then it's like whatever that is, the controlling force goes, you like that? Try this. And throws, something from left field at you. This is one of my comments when we get into the issues of meeting with entities and whatnot. I think that little guys coming out of flying saucers is, in general, relatively new and localized when you compare it with interactions between humans and sentient non-humans that have been reported globally, throughout human history. So the notion that the UFO is there, frankly, to me, is sort of an interesting sidelight. The bigger issue is what the hell's going on with, experiences with, non-human, sentient, non-human entities.
Interactions that go back and have been written about in 5,000 years ago, even.
Yes. Well, that's the point. But connecting it to a UFO, doing it, in general, is relatively new.
And in one of the discussions with Mr. Sherman that was, I believe, not on one of the radio broadcasts, he said that one night they had been having the red, mysterious balls coming in and out and around the front of their house that were there quite a bit. And he suddenly felt very angry because he could see yellow, what looked like windows on some sort of a craft through his spotting rifle. And he said, without thinking about the consequences, he ran down from the house toward these yellow windows and got down below something that was hovering above, and that he was screaming at them and raising his fists, and that he could see two humanoid figures that looked to him human, looking down in telepathically. What Mr. Sherman had come into his head were these thoughts: it won't do any good to explain to him why we are here because he will never understand it. And that was from Mr. Sherman to me back in the 90s.
But I keep getting back to the trickster, that some external force that is certainly sentient, that is controlling all of these events. When I call it precognitive, my point there would be that it seemed to know how we were going to respond, what we were going to do before the event even occurred. Yes. And I came away with a notion that I call the precognitive sentient phenomena. Mm-hmm. And that really applies, I think, to your suggestion here. And that was that there was a they. Mm-hmm. And it was always one step ahead. And many people who have studied phenomena, I've had several of them, where you study it, you're doing instrumentation, and you don't get any results, and then just off camera something happens or something else comes. And the phenomena itself keeps morphing. Mm-hmm. And it's like whatever it is in control, and says, oh, you like that? Try this. And you get something totally different.